Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The hologram filled the entire dome of Xenobiology Hall 7.IT was a planet. Blue and green, wrapped in white cloud. Beautiful, in the way that a sharpened blade is beautiful. It rotated slowly at the center of the circular classroom, and around its edges pulsed a thick red border, the Galactic Union's highest biological hazard marker. Class 5. Deathworld. 30 students sat in curved rows around it. Some had four eyes. Some had none. Some breathed filtered air through masks clipped to their faces. One was the size of a small vehicle. Another floated 2 inches off the seat, held up by a low personal gravity field. One was human. She sat near the back. Her name was Dara Osei, and she was watching the planet rotate with the quiet focus of someone who had seen it before, which she had, every day of her life, from the inside. Professor Vin moved through the projection with 6 limbs, 4 of which he used to walk, 2 to gesture. He was Tilari, insectoid, precise, and deeply proud of his subject. His compound eyes caught light as he turned to address the class. "This," he said, "is where we begin." He tapped a control panel, and the planet shrank, pushed to the upper corner of the dome. In its place came data. Long columns of atmospheric composition, gravity rating, temperature range, biological density index. The numbers were not comforting. Class 5 designation is rare, Vin continued. Only 11 planets in the cataloged galaxy carry it. To earn the rating, a biosphere must demonstrate active lethality at every ecological level. Not just apex predators, the soil, the water, the air in some cases. Every layer of life competing, killing, and adapting at a speed that produces organisms which should not, by reasonable biological standards, exist. A student near the front, Soli, Tilari like the professor, the one who always sat closest, raised a limb. "What makes this one the focus of the module, Professor?" "There are 10 others." Vin's mandibles moved in what his students had learned to read as a smile. "Because this one," he said, "produced something the other 10 did not. We will get to that. But first, we study what the planet built before it built its strangest creature." He pulled up the first specimen. It was large, tawny-colored, muscled in a way that looked almost architectural. For limbs for movement, a skull built around a jaw that the data said could generate enough force to crush the structural supports of a light transport vehicle. It hunted in coordinated groups. It was fast. It was patient. It had been observed waiting motionless for hours before a kill. The front of the room. Lura, small, Nessie species, bioluminescent patches running along her arms, flickered pale blue. That was her color for stress. Breck, who sat beside Dara, made a low sound. He was Kurovi, large, thick-furred, gentle in the way that very strong creatures often choose to be. "That thing is real," he said quietly. "Very," Dara said. He looked at her. She was still watching the hologram. Her expression was calm. Not the calm of someone suppressing something, just genuinely calm. He found that slightly more unsettling than the creature on the screen. Vin moved through 3 more species. A reptile with a jaw that unhinged, thermal sensing organs behind its eyes, and a chemical delivery system in its teeth that stopped the hearts of animals 20 times its size. A creature that walked on all fours but could shift to 2 when it needed its front limbs free to manipulate objects. Highly social, deeply territorial, capable of using its environment as a weapon. A water predator so perfectly shaped for killing that it had not needed to change its body plan in over 200 million years. Each one landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Soli was taking notes rapidly. Several students had pushed back slightly from their desks, a reflex as though distance from the hologram helped. Lura had gone from blue to a pale, uncertain yellow. Vin paused the presentation. "Before we continue," he said, "I want a hypothesis. Given what this planet's fauna demonstrates, the speed, the sensory capability, the coordination, what would a species need in order to survive here? Not visit, not observe from safety. Actually live on this world generation after generation, without technological shelter. What would survival require? Silence. Soli's limb went up after a moment. Extreme physical defense, armored biology, or a burrowing lifestyle underground, away from the surface predators. Ben Nadif. Reasonable. Others. A student from the far side suggested chemical deterrence. Another proposed a very short generational cycle. Reproduce fast, die young, rely on numbers. Then Dara raised her hand. The professor looked at her. He had not called on her yet this semester. She had been quiet in the way that some students were quiet because they had nothing to say, and others were quiet because they were paying very close attention. He had not yet determined which type she was. Yes, he said. None of those would be enough on their own, Doris said. Her voice was even, unhurried. A planet that dangerous doesn't give you one problem to solve. It gives you 50 at once. So the species that survived long-term probably wasn't the most armored or the fastest. It was the most adaptable. Generalist diet, so it could eat almost anything. Social structure, so it didn't have to survive alone. And smart enough to learn from what tried to kill it instead of just running. She paused. It would also have to be comfortable with loss. A planet like that takes things from you constantly. The species that lasted would have learned to keep going anyway. The room was quiet. Ven looked at her for a long moment. That is, he said carefully, a very specific hypothesis for someone who has only seen 3 specimens. Dara said nothing. She folded her hands on the desk. Duddy moved on. After class, Dara stopped at the archive terminal near the hall's exit. She typed in a request for access to the full threat assessment archive for the Class 5 world from the lecture. The terminal processed. It asked for her planet of origin for cross-reference. She typed it in. There was a pause longer than the system usually took. Then a small yellow advisory appeared on the screen. Student profile flagged. Origin planet matches subject world. Access granted with notation. Personal exposure to classified threat fauna considered likely. Dara stared at it for a moment. Then she picked up her bag and walked out into the corridor, already thinking about what the archive was going to say about her home. She had a feeling it was going to be dramatic. The common area on level 9 smelled like 6 different kinds of food, and none of them were compatible. That was the thing about a university built for 40 species. The kitchen could do anything, but the ventilation struggled. Dara had gotten used to it. She actually liked it, the layered strangeness of it, the way every meal hour was an accidental experiment in how different life could be and still call itself hungry. She was eating groundnut soup she had requested from the human cuisine menu. The kitchen's attempt was decent, not her grandmother's, but decent, when Breck folded himself into the seat across from her. He was almost too large for the furniture. He managed. You said very, he said, by way of greeting. Dara looked up. Saw in class. When I asked if that creature was real. You said very. Not yes. Very. He set down his food, which was a dense block of something that smelled like pine and copper. It sounded like someone who had seen it. Dara considered him. Breck had an honest face, which was an odd thing to think about, a face that belonged to a species with a snout and amber eyes the size of her fist. But it was true. He wasn't asking to be clever. He was just curious. I haven't seen one personally, she said, but I know what they are. How? I grew up on a planet that has them. Breck went still for a moment in the way large creatures do when something recalculates. Then he said, you should probably have mentioned that to the professor. He'll figure it out, Doris said, and went back to her soup. 2 days later, Xenobiology Hall 7 was tenser than usual. Ven had sent a pre-session notice that the class would be moving to the full biological case study of the Mystery Class 5 world. Not just environmental data, actual species profiles, detailed breakdowns, threat assessments. Lura had arrived early and was already at a pale, anxious green. Soli had a new notepad and sat with her limbs arranged in the particular pattern that meant she intended to be the best student in the room today. Dara arrived with a cup of tea from the machine in the hall. She sat down. She took out her notebook, the paper kind, which several students had noticed and found unusual. Most species in the Union had moved past paper centuries ago. She liked it anyway. You couldn't lose your notes in a system crash. Ven began that he brought up the first animal that was the feline from the previous session. But now the full file was open. Not just appearance, behavior, range, hunting methodology, recorded kill data, interaction with other predators. The numbers were clinical and the implications were not. It weighed between 130 and 190 kilograms. It could accelerate to 50 kilometers per hour in short bursts. It had been documented dragging prey heavier than itself up vertical surfaces to keep other predators away from the kill. Solely analyzed it on command. She called it an extinction-tier apex predator if introduced to any biosphere with lower biological competition density. She said it with confidence. Vin confirmed she was correct. The second creature came up, the reptile. Dara had known it her whole life as a crocodile. The archive called it a highly successful ambush macropredator with a bite force exceeding most known species at comparable size, a metabolic system that allowed for months without feeding, and a lineage so successful that its fundamental body plan had not changed in over 200 million years. The archive noted that its emotional response system was minimal and its patience was functionally limitless. Lyra's light had gone to a deep, steady blue. That was not stress anymore. That was something past stress that had become resignation. Then the third one. The pack hunter. Lean, fast, social to a degree that the archive classified as a separate threat multiplier. It didn't just hunt. It coordinated. It assigned roles. It communicated during a chase with a system of vocalizations complex enough that researchers had partially mapped it as a proto-language. It could run for hours. It chose prey based on weakness assessment, not just availability. Someone in the class said very quietly, "How does anything live on that planet?" Vin paused the display. He looked out at the room. "That," he said, "is what the next session will answer. But today I want to try something. I want one of you to hypothesize, given these three animals alone, what a co-evolved intelligent species on this world would look like. What would have to be to share a biosphere with creatures like these?" Silence. Then Dara raised her hand. Vin looked at her. He had been noticing her. The calmness. The paper notebook. The way she watched each specimen like she was checking it against something she already knew. "Go ahead," he said. "It wouldn't be the biggest thing on the planet," she said. "Big is expensive. It costs too much food, too much sleep, too much energy to maintain. Against animals like the ones you've shown, raw size isn't the advantage." She tapped her pen on the notebook once. "It would be medium-sized, enough to be physically capable, not so much that it needs to eat constantly. It would be social, not optional social, where individuals can survive alone if they have to. Mandatory social, built for groups. Because the pack hunter proves that coordination beats individual ability every time on this world, and the intelligent species would have learned that lesson very early." She paused. "It would also have a very high pain tolerance. A planet like this doesn't let you stop moving because something hurts. The individuals that stopped moving died. So the ones who survived, and their children, and their children's children, learned to keep going." The room was quiet in a particular way. The way rooms go quiet when something is happening that people aren't sure how to name yet. Soli was not writing. She was watching Dara. Vin said, "You speak about this species in a very specific way for someone reasoning theoretically." Dara met his eyes. She didn't answer immediately. She just wrote something in her notebook, neat and unhurried, and then looked back up. "You said we'd cover the co-evolved species next session," she said. "We will." "I'll wait then," she said. "I think it'll be more interesting that way." Vin stared at her for 2 full seconds. Then he ended the session. Nobody talked much before class that day. That was unusual. Xenobiology Hall 7 was normally a place of low, busy noise. Students comparing notes, debating taxonomy, complaining about the archive system's search filters. But Vin had sent a second message the night before. A reminder. It said only, "Tomorrow we cover the dominant co-evolved species from the Class 5 world. Please review the pre-reading on psychological threat categorization if you have not already." Lyra had read it 4 times. She had not slept well. She sat in her seat now, with both small hands flat on her desk and her bioluminescent patches cycling through colors without pattern, which happened when her nervous system couldn't settle on a single emotion. Breck had brought an extra nutrient pack. He was already eating it. He offered half to Dara when she sat down. I'm okay, she said. It is for me, he admitted. I eat when I'm anxious. You being okay makes me more anxious. She took half. Soli was at the front. Back straight. Notepad open. She had done the pre-reading. She had done additional reading beyond the pre-reading. She was ready. She was always ready. But there was something else in her posture today. A watchfulness directed not at the projection dome, but at the back rows. At Dara. Vin walked in without preamble. He went to the panel. He called up the dome. We have looked at what this planet produces, he said. Today we look at what it kept. The species that did not die. The one that looked at everything we have reviewed this week and not only survived alongside it, but rose to become the world's dominant intelligence. He pulled up a file. The planet is called Earth. Third body of the Sol system. Class 5 biological hazard rating. And the species we are examining today is called human. He pressed a key. The hologram filled with data the students read. The room absorbed it the way a room absorbs a sudden temperature drop, slowly, and then all at once. Endurance predators. Capable of sustained physical pursuit for periods exceeding several hours across varied terrain. Prey animals subjected to persistence hunting experienced physiological breakdown from exhaustion before the human required significant rest. Pain tolerance rating. Exceptional. Injury recovery compared to body mass. Exceptional. Documented cases of individuals continuing physical activity through injuries that would have incapacitated most known species of comparable size. Social bonding structure. Complex and unusually resilient. Group cohesion increases measurably in high-stress and high-threat environments, inverting the typical pattern seen in most social species. Threat to one individual frequently triggers coordinated group response disproportionate to the individual's status. Psychological warfare capability, documented and significant. Humans demonstrate the ability to plan, deceive, and strategically misdirect opponents across extended time frames. Dietary classification, extreme omnivore. Capable of metabolizing an unusually wide range of organic matter, including substances toxic to most known species. Notable behavior. Domestication of multiple apex predator species from the native biosphere for use as companions, working animals, and in some historical cases, combat auxiliaries. Biosphere modification. Humans altered the ecological systems of their planet on a scale not seen outside of Class 6 geological events. Intentional, sustained, multigenerational, survival of mass extinction events, confirmed. Human ancestral lineage survived no fewer than 3 planetary-scale extinction-level disruptions. The room was very still. Then someone made a sound. A small, involuntary sound, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. And then, as if the sound had broken a spell, every set of eyes in the room moved. They moved to the back are OW.TO Dara. She was reading the hologram. Not with wide eyes. Not with her hand over her mouth. She was reading it the way you read a report about something you already knew, checking facts, noting where the phrasing was slightly off. She had found at least 3 things she wanted to comment on. A student named Privik, who had 4 upper limbs and usually sat very still, said in a voice just above a whisper, "Is there a human in this room?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Dara looked up. She looked around at all the faces turned toward her. Some wide, some unreadable. Lura had gone the color of old paper. Breck, to his credit, just looked at her the way he always looked at her. Steady, waiting. Yes, Dara said. 3 students pushed back from their desks. Not dramatically, just the automatic adjustment of bodies that had received new information and were recalculating distances. Soli had gone very still. She was staring at Dara with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite fascination. It was the look of someone whose hypothesis had just been confirmed in a way they hadn't entirely prepared for. Vin raised 2 limbs. "There is no cause for alarm," he said. The fact that he had to say it was itself informative. The presence of a student from Earth in this class is documented and within university policy. We will proceed. She has been here the whole time, Lura said softly. To no one in particular. Processing aloud. The whole time, Breck confirmed, with what sounded like quiet admiration. She described the species before you show the file, Solis said, and her voice was controlled, but there was something cracked open in it. She knew exactly what it would look like, because she was describing herself. Vin looked at Dara. Is that accurate? Dara set down her pen. I was being careful, she said. I didn't want to bias the class's analysis. You were asking for theoretical reasoning. I gave you theoretical reasoning. It just happened to be reasoning I had a lot of personal data to draw from. Someone laughed. A short, surprised sound. They immediately stopped, embarrassed. Dara did not smile exactly. But something close to it moved across her face. Vin stared at her for a long moment. The entire class waited. Would you, he said finally, in the careful tone of a professor who is rethinking several assumptions simultaneously, like to respond to the archive's assessment? Any portion of it you feel requires context. Dara looked at the hologram, at the long columns of data about her species, about herself in a technical sense. Yes, she said. I would like that very much. She stood up. She picked up her notebook. She walked to the front of the room. She stood at the front of the room the way people stand when they are not trying to be anything in particular, in a wide stance. No performance. She held her notebook loosely at her side and looked at the data still glowing in the dome above her. All that clinical language about endurance and pain and predation and extinction. And she seemed, to most of the students watching her, completely unbothered by it. That was perhaps the strangest part. I'll go through it in order, she said. Some of it is accurate. Some of it is missing context. One part I'm going to leave alone because it's just true, and I think you should keep it in mind. Vin gave her a small nod. He had not planned this. He was fairly certain it was good pedagogy anyway. He was less certain about several other things. Dara pointed to the first block of text. Endurance predators, she said. That's accurate. Humans evolved in a hot environment with a cooling system. We sweat. Most species that live on Earth don't do it the way we do. We can release heat while we move, which means we can move longer before our bodies shut down from temperature. We use that to hunt. You run the animal until it collapses, then you walk up to it. She paused. My grandmother told me her mother used to run down goats on foot across open land when she was young. Not a special soldier. Not an athlete. Just a woman who needed to eat and knew how to keep going. The room was very quiet. It wasn't dramatic, Dara said. It was just a thing you did. She moved to the next section. Pain tolerance. Also accurate. I want to be clear, though. Humans don't enjoy pain. We have the same nerve responses as most species. It hurts. The difference is what we do next. We don't stop. That's not bravery in most cases. It's just a very old habit. The ancestors who stopped got eaten. So here we are. Lura's hand went up slightly, then lowered, then went up again. Does it hurt now? Being here? I mean, everything is different from your planet. The air, the gravity settings, that the food is a bit off, Dara said. The gravity's close enough. I'm feeling it. Lura's light settled into a softer color. Dietary classification, Dara continued. Extreme omnivore. Yes, we can eat a very wide range of things. We have developed techniques to make even toxic substances safe through preparation processes. There's a tradition in many human cultures of deliberately eating things that are slightly dangerous and learning to process them in small amounts to build tolerance. She glanced at the class. I understand that is alarming from the outside. From the inside, it is called cooking, and we find it very enjoyable. Two students exchanged a look. Biosphere modification, she said. Her voice was the same, but something in her posture shifted. A small, almost invisible weight. That one I'm not going to defend. It's true. We changed the planet. A lot of it was damage. Some of it is still being repaired. A lot of humans spent and are still spending their lives trying to fix what other humans broke. She looked at the floor for exactly 1 second. We are not a species that agrees with ourselves very often. Sori spoke. She had been silent this whole time, sitting very straight with her notepad closed. The domestication of apex predators, she said. Explain that. Dara reached in her bag. She pulled out her tablet and turned it so the class could see the screen. On it was a photograph an old woman sitting on a wooden step in strong sunlight. Beside her was a dog. Large, short-haired, reddish-brown, with a heavy head and deep chest of a ridgeback. The dog had its chin resting on the woman's knee and was looking at the camera with the particular expression of an animal that is exactly where it wants to be. His name was Kwame, Doris said. He lived with my grandmother for 11 years. He slept at the foot of my bed when I visited. She let the class look at the photo. The species he belongs to was originally bred by people in southern Africa to hunt lions. To hunt lions. He spent his retirement watching goats and being fed table scraps. She lowered the tablet. He was not dangerous to us. He was family. The room was quiet in a way that had changed. It was not the quiet of fear anymore. It was something else, harder to name. Breck said very quietly, "He looks comfortable." He was, Doris said. Soli spoke again. Her voice was careful, like she was handling something delicate. The archive's threat assessment note at the end. The one about emotional attachment to other species, increasing strategic unpredictability, and heightened aggression when those attachments are threatened. Her eyes were steady on Dara. You skipped that one. Dara had. She looked at Soli. I said there was one I was going to leave alone because it's true, she said. That's the one. She let that sit for a moment. We build bonds. With each other. With animals. With places. With ideas. And when something threatens what we've bonded to, we stop being reasonable about it. That's not a small fact about my species. It's probably the most important one in that file. She closed her notebook. I'm not telling you that to be threatening. I'm telling you because honest data matters. You're xenobiology students. You should have accurate information. Vin had not moved in several minutes. He was thinking about the entire shape of his module and whether it needed revision. Soli uncapped her pen. Why did you come here? She asked. To this university. To this specific field. A species like yours, with those capabilities. Why xenobiology? Dara looked at her for a moment. Because I grew up surrounded by animals that could kill me, she said simply. And I spent my whole childhood being more curious about them than scared. I wanted to know why things are the way they are. That's all. She glanced around the room, at all the different faces, all the different ways life had figured out how to think. That's still all. Vin cleared his throat. Miss Osei, he said, would you be willing to continue in this capacity for the rest of the module? As a supplemental source. Dara considered it. Yes, on one condition, which is, I get to ask the class questions too, she said. I've never been in a room with this many species at once. I have questions. Vin thought about this. Agreed, he said. Soli looked at her notepad. She wrote something down, and she looked back up at Dara and said nothing. But the quality of her silence had changed. Something had shifted in the classroom. You could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure, not dramatic, not sudden, just different from what it was before. Students sat closer to Dara now, not all of them. Soli still maintained her front row position and her front row discipline. But Lura had moved 2 seats to the left at the start of the following week, which put her directly beside Dara's row. She had done it without explanation, as if she had simply corrected a geographical error. Breck had begun saving her a spot in the common area, the seat against the wall, which in Kurovi's social structure was the seat you offered to someone you considered worth protecting. He would have been embarrassed if anyone told him that. Dara had not told him. The questions had started too. Small ones at first. Lura asking about sleep. She had read the section in the archive about human sleep requirements and couldn't understand why an apex predator species will be vulnerable for 8 hours in every 24. Dara had explained the trust architecture that human societies had built around that vulnerability. Lura had gone very bright gold, which meant she was moved by something, and said, "You built civilization on the decision to trust other people while you were unconscious." When you say it like that, it sounds grand, Dara said. It also just means we developed very strong opinions about blankets and pillows. Lura had found this extremely funny. Kurovi humor operated on different frequencies, but Breck had produced a sound like stones rolling together, which was apparently his equivalent of a chuckle. IT was the 3rd week after the reveal when Dara stood at the front of the room again. Vin had given her the session. Her topic was human biology and adaptation, but she had framed it herself, which Vin had permitted with the careful optimism of a professor who sensed his module was becoming something more interesting than he had originally designed. She started with sweat. Most of you regulate heat by other means, she said. Respiratory cooling, shade-seeking, metabolic slowdown. Oman sweat. The whole surface of our skin can release heat while we are moving, which means our operational temperature window during physical exertion is wider than it looks. The planet made us that way. It was very hot for a very long time, and the individuals who couldn't keep moving in that heat didn't leave descendants. She moved on to immune system complexity, the number of pathogens on Earth, and the arms race that had resulted. We are walking biological archives, she said. Our immune systems have fought more wars than most recorded histories. We carry the memory of every disease our ancestors survived in our blood. Right now, Soli was writing, steadily, which was different from her usual rapid-fire notation. She was writing slowly and carefully, as if she didn't want to miss the exact phrasing. Then Dara reached her notes on sleep. The archive flagged it as a vulnerability, she said. 8 hours of reduced consciousness every cycle. Physically exposed, cognitively offline, unable to respond to threats at full capacity. She paused. It is a vulnerability, but it's also a social contract. If you sleep, you trust the people around you. You trust that they won't hurt you while you can't defend yourself. You trust that they'll wake you if something goes wrong. We have been making that agreement with each other since before we knew how to build shelters. It is maybe the oldest human relationship there is. She looked out at the room. Every human social structure, family, community, city, nation, is built, at some level, on the decision that these people are safe to sleep near. Lura made a soft sound. Before Dara could continue, her communication device lit up on the corner of the desk. She glanced at it. A small flicker of something crossed her face, not annoyance. Something warmer. I'm sorry, she said to the room. This is my grandmother. She doesn't always check time zones. She reached to dismiss the call. Take it, Breck said. He said it simply, without fuss. Several other students made agreeable sounds. Dara looked at the class. Then she accepted the call. The hologram that appeared was small, table-sized, because the field projector on Dara's device was personal use scale. But the figure was clear, an older woman, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, standing in what was obviously outdoor sunlight. Behind her were the shapes of plants, a fence, red soil. The light in the hologram was warm and golden. The woman squinted at the classroom full of alien students. Oh, she said, in a voice that was completely unconcerned by what she was looking at. Are those your classmates? Yes, Grandma. Tell them I said hello. She looked around the projection as if she could see further into the room by tilting her head. Are they feeding you? You look thin. The food is fine. Is not fine if you look thin. She turned slightly and called back in another language to someone off screen, then turned back. I'm sending you the recipe file again. You give it to whoever makes the food there. You don't have to. I sent it. Is sent. Who is the big one? Every student in the room looked at Breck. Breck raised a large hand. Good, Dara's grandmother said, with complete seriousness. Someone to walk her home at night. You. She pointed. You take care of her. Breck said, very earnestly. I will. Good boy. She looked back at Dara. Call me on the weekend. The real weekend, not whatever the station uses. I mean Saturday. Yes, Grandma. I love you. I love you too. The hologram closed. The room was silent. Lura was the color of sunrise, deep orange-pink, which in Nessie biology was the shade that occurred during profound warmth. She was also trying very hard not to make any noise. Breck appeared to be sitting slightly straighter than before. He had been assigned a duty. He intended to fulfill it. Soli said nothing. She was looking at the place where the hologram had been. Her pen was still on the paper. She had stopped writing in the middle of a sentence. It was Vin who finally spoke. His voice was measured, but something in it was different. A professor grappling with the fact that the most instructive thing that had happened in his classroom this week had not been on his lesson plan. Miss Osei, he said, you were discussing the social architecture of human trust relationships. Dara composed herself. She was a little pink around the ears. Right, she said. Yes. Where was I? The oldest human relationship, Soli said quietly. She had not moved, but her eyes had come back from the empty air where the hologram had been, and they were on Dara. You were talking about who is safe to sleep near. Dara looked at her. Soli looked back. She is not afraid of us, Soli said. Not to Dara, to herself, or to the room, or to the idea. Your grandmother looked at all of us, and she was not afraid at all. No, Dara said. Why not? Dara thought about it for a moment. She thought about red soil and that old fence and 40 years of farming and a dog named Kwame and her grandmother's voice when she talked about running goats down on foot because the family needed to eat. Because she survived a lot scarier things than a classroom, Dara said. Dean Orith came in at the end of the session. He appeared at the back of the room without announcement, which was the move of a man who wanted to see something without changing it by being observed. He stood with his hands folded. He watched Dara field a question from Previc about human conflict behavior and give an answer that was patient and precise and ended with a line that made 3 students produce laughter sounds and he made a note on his tablet. He left before the session formally ended. He said nothing to Professor Vin until the following morning. The thesis was 42 pages long, and it had a title that made Professor Vin read it twice. What Earth Made Us: A Framework for Understanding Human Psychology as a Tool for Interspecies Cooperation. Not a threat assessment. Not a warning document. A framework for cooperation. He read the first page, standing in his office, intending to skim and move on. He finished it sitting down, 2 hours later, having read every word. The central argument was this: that the qualities cataloged in the Galactic Union's Threat Assessment Archive as dangerous were, in the correct context, the same qualities that made humans extraordinarily useful partners. Endurance, pain tolerance, emotional bonding, heightened group response to threat, the adaptability that let them eat almost anything, live almost anywhere, survive almost everything. The archive read these as warnings. Dara argued they were also invitations, if you knew how to read them. Her conclusion was the part that stayed with him. She wrote, "The most successful survival strategy Earth ever produced was not a weapon or a body plan or a metabolic advantage. It was the human decision to extend trust beyond their own kind, to look at something different and strange and potentially dangerous and choose, deliberately, to try to understand it. Humans were still alive," she argued, not only because they were hard to kill, but because they were very hard to make permanently into an enemy. They kept trying to make friends. Vin gave her the highest mark in the module. In the comments box he wrote, "I found your central argument troublingly convincing." She wrote back, "Thank you." That was the goal. The last day of the module arrived overcast and quiet. The station's lighting systems cycled through a dawn simulation that most students had stopped noticing and Dara had never stopped finding interesting. She sat in the common area with her tea and her paper notebook and a list of things she needed to do before the semester officially closed. Soli found her there. She sat down across from Dara without asking, which was new. In the first weeks of the semester, she had never voluntarily sat near Dara at all. She put both of her hands on the table and seemed to be organizing something internally before she spoke. At the start of term, Soli said, "I filed a report with the Student Safety Office. I suggested that the university should review its policy regarding students from Class 5 origin worlds in unsupervised, mixed classroom environments." Dara looked at her over the edge of her cup. "I figured," she said. Soli's mandibles pressed together briefly. "You knew. You watched me differently than the others did. Not fear exactly. More like active assessment. I assumed you were either very interested in xenobiology or you were keeping notes on me specifically. Both turned out to be true." Soli was quiet for a moment. "I rescinded the report 3 weeks ago." "Okay, I want you to understand why." She straightened slightly. "I was using the archive as a proxy for you. The archive described a category. I applied the category to a person without adequate independent data. That is not good science. It is also not fair." Dara put down her cup. She looked at Soli carefully. Soli looked back, steady, neither seeking forgiveness nor denying what she had done. "Thank you for telling me," Dara said. "I thought you should know." They were not friends yet. They both understood that. But the space between them had changed shape, and That was a start. Breck found her after the final session that he was holding something wrapped in a piece of woven cloth, and he presented it with the directness of someone who had decided to do a thing and saw no point in building up to it. It was a small figure, carved from pale reddish wood, shaped like a human. Simple, clearly made by hand. Memory wood, he said. From Kurovi. We give it to people we intend to remember. Dara took it carefully. The wood was warm. It smelled faintly of pine and something sweeter underneath. It is not a large gesture in your culture. Maybe, Breck said, slightly less certain now that it was out of his hands. But in mine it is. It means I will carry you. In here. He touched his chest, even when we are not in the same place. Dara looked at the small carved figure. She thought about how she had walked into this university as the only human in the xenobiology wing and how the first 6 weeks had felt like being a specimen in her own class. She thought about Lura's questions and Breck's extra nutrient pack, and the way the room had gone quiet after her grandmother signed off, all that warmth flooding into it from a small hologram of a woman standing in red soil sunlight. It's a large gesture, she said. Thank you, Breck. He made the Rolling Stone sound. Satisfied, Laura delivered her news last. She was effervescent with it, a warm, pulsing gold, and she could barely finish one sentence before starting the next. She had submitted Dara's thesis to the Interspecies Relations faculty as recommended supplemental reading for their first-year diplomacy students. The faculty had accepted it. They had asked Laura to pass on that it was, in their words, the clearest explanation of human motivation they had encountered in published literature. Dara laughed. It surprised her. I just wrote what I knew, she said. That is exactly why it worked, Laura said. You explained yourselves better than any diplomat has. Dean Orth's office was large and full of careful, considered objects. Certificates, models of star systems, photographs with important people that had been placed close enough to the desk to be noticed, but not so close as to seem like boasting. He offered Dara a seat. He folded his hands. The Xenobiology department, he said, maintains the Threat Assessment Archive as a teaching tool. It is a record of biological data gathered over many decades. Some of that data is reviewed regularly. Some of it has not been reviewed in a very long time. The human entry was last updated 43 years ago, Doris said. I checked. Yes. He paused. We would like to offer you a consulting position next year. Student grade, compensated, focused on reviewing the accuracy of the archive's records relating to Earth and its species. You would work with the faculty on identifying gaps, outdated information, and framing that may benefit from revision. He said the last part carefully. Framing. You mean the parts that treat a description of a species as a threat assessment without accounting for context, Doris said. That is one way to put it, Orth said. It is overdue. You would be well positioned to assist. Dara thought about it. She thought about the red border that had pulsed around her planet in the projection dome on the first day. The Class 5 marker. All those clinical words about what her species was capable of doing to the things around it. How none of it was wrong, exactly, but how it had been missing what? The part where her grandmother named the dog. The part where they built cities around the act of trusting each other in the dark. Yes, she said. I'll do it. She walked back through the station afterward, past the research halls and the food courts and the view windows and all the noise of 40 species trying to learn how to understand each other. She stopped at the long window on level 12 where you could see open space, clear and deep and full of things she hadn't studied yet. She opened her notebook. She wrote one line at the top of a clean page. To understand a species. Do not start with what they can survive. Start with what they choose to protect. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the notebook and walked on. There was a lot of work still to do.